Well, I am so excited to have this podcast today. You know why? We've got a very special guest here today, and she is so excited to be here right now. My beautiful wife, Stephanie. This show today, the reason why we're going to have this show today is we're breaking from the norm. Very seldom in life do you go through an experience that just requires to be shared, and we went on a couple trips this summer. And we just had such an awesome 2-week vacation with the family. We went somewhere, we went to Hawaii with another family. And right smack in the middle of this vacation, God just gave us this crazy thing that happened with us. And this entire podcast is really the telling of that story and what it meant to us and partly a thank you for everybody that reached out, our community, our family. And so we just want to share a little bit of that story today. So it kind of started back in the middle of May. And I had a cough and I knew I was getting ready to go to Kenya. And I went to Kenya last summer and I went to Kenya this summer. And you don't want to be sick in Kenya because, medicine is pretty difficult to find. So knowing I had this cough, even Steph was like, you're coughing a lot. And so I went to go see the doctor and we just chalked it up to like a post-nasal drip, whatever. Get all packed up, get over to Kenya, and my cough was there. Cough was on the plane, I was just, it was so annoying because it was like, every 5 minutes I'm coughing. And then I'd
and
have
how long is that flight? Everyone around you, I'm sure, was really enjoying it.
14 hours to where we were.
Just a dry cough, though, so it didn't sound bad, but just annoying.
And the doctor was like, it wasn't that big of a deal.
Sure.
So I get over there, keep coughing, call him up, and I'm like, this cough won't go away. And he's like, well, just take some of this medicine. And he had given me lots of medicine. Every time I go on these missions trips, I get like a suitcase of medicine in case something happens. I've got my
mobile pharmacy.
This. Yeah. My doctor's so good, So he had me take some like a prednisone a day. And it reduced my cough during the day, but mornings and nights were still pretty bad. And I'd have a coughing fit every now and then. And God did some awesome stuff in Kenya while we were there. It's a very crazy, very short trip. And then we get back from Kenya, and I was in Charlotte like a day. A little over a day. And then we head off to our vacation in Hawaii, which is another really long flight. I wouldn't recommend stacking those two trips because there was a 13-hour time zone difference between Kenya.
Literally went halfway around the world.
Yeah. And I had for whatever reason, I had
no jet lag.
No jet lag, zero. I adjusted to Kenya and I adjusted to Charlotte the one night we were here and I adjusted to Hawaii the first night we were there. It was crazy. I think I adjusted better than anybody else. Yeah. And it was literally like the opposite day of where I was.
Should have been flipped. Wasn't it?
The first part of that vacation was so fun. We started, we did biking down Haleakala, which is like 14,000 foot mountain. You just kind of come down. And we did snorkeling and your typical vacation, beach, surfing, jet skiing. I mean, it was fun.
Yeah.
And then I don't remember if it was like the third or fourth day. In the morning, my coughing fits would get kind of bad. And then I would cough up like colored phlegm, which I learned is the medical term is sputum.
It had a orange, like a burnt orange color, which was
pinky.
kind of a little bit of pink. Yeah.
Okay.
Weird color.
So you're like, is this got blood in it?
Well,
it's more than just like, it's not.
Not clear and green. It was an odd color.
And Reed's like, that's blood.
Yeah.
And I was in denial. I was like, that's not blood. There's no way. So I call my doctor. And he's
home.
like, back here.
Okay.
And he's like, I want you to go get an x-ray. And actually, I text him a picture of it. We go get an x-ray. We go back in the exam room. The guy's like, we don't have an exam. It's Hawaii,
Yeah.
He's like, we don't have an exam or an x-ray machine here. But he's like, let me do an exam. And, we're chit-chatting, having a good time. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, what do you think this is? I showed him the picture. And he's like, looks like blood to me. He goes, unless,
you've been drinking
Gatorade.
Gatorade.
Yeah. And I was like, I've been drinking Gatorade every day. The exact same color.
Orange.
It was their refresh kind. It was like their coconut whatever.
Yep.
And it was like a watermelon something, and it looked exactly the same color. So I went home that day going,
We thought that's what it was.
It's Gatorade.
It's Gatorade.
Went to this awesome dinner at Mama's Fish House that night, taking pictures on the beach. It was so fun. And they get up.
Outside of the cough, you felt okay?
I had no issues.
So it was just this cough.
I was
Like, feel great.
exercising every day. I had no issues. I could do whatever I want.
Yeah.
I did notice my heart rate was elevated.
But it wasn't like you were tired.
Nothing.
Like exhausted or anything like that.
I had no issues. I mean, she, other than the cough, she's like, had no signs.
Yeah, we were just thinking maybe allergies.
Sure.
I mean, because he
Well,
felt
and you've
fine.
been all
and-
over the place.
Right.
Like you got some little cold.
Literally halfway
Like a
around the world.
postnasal
Yes.
drip.
Yeah.
something
Especially
like
flying, airplane,
Yeah.
like the whole thing.
I was
get
in
cold.
3 continents in one day. Africa, Asia, and America. The United States. And so we go get an x-ray the next morning, 9 a.m. Get up early, get out there early. That's vacation, right?
Yeah.
We take him back to the exam room. We're chit-chatting a little bit, and then he quickly takes me off down the hall to an x-ray where, and he looks like me. Like I think he had shorts on.
I think he did.
Short sleeve
Hawaii.
shirt. Yeah,
It's Hawaii,
right?
yeah.
And we're having fun doing the x-ray, whatever. And we come back in. We're in the exam room, just Steph and I, waiting on him. And she takes this video of, like, there was a picture of the beach on the wall, and she, like, zooms in on the picture, and she's like, we should be here right now. And then she zooms out. And instead, we're here because my husband, again, for the second vacation in a row, was in the ER, urgent care or ER. And I'm sitting there like, what's going on, right? Well, then just after we filmed that video, the doctor walks in, and he's completely changed. He's got mask on, shield on, purple gloves, like this plastic hazmat suit type of thing. And she goes, uh-oh. And he has his
something wasn't right.
And he has his laptop, and he's like, well, here's your chest x-ray, and it's not good. Like, that was his demeanor.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, you see this little thing right here? And he's pointing to the screen. There's this little circle that I had right here, 5 millimeter hole in my lung. And,
I think he called it a lesion.
A lesion,
Whatever.
which is basically a hole. And I don't think it's a traditional hole that we understand it, but that's what they call it. And he's like, this is not good. And he goes, well, it's either a tumor, cancer, or tuberculosis. And we look at each other like, are you
kidding me right now?
2 seconds, our life got flipped upside down.
We go from thinking it's Gatorade,
Right,
to
yeah.
now
Here's
we're
my
saying
3
cancer.
options.
Yeah.
And
2 of which are not great.
all I heard was cancer. That's all I heard.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, you being back from Kenya, because I was in Kenya like 5 days earlier. He's like, I think it's tuberculosis. And he's like, I've seen it before. I used to work in Miami. And he's like, whatever. And he's like, I think it's tuberculosis, and you need to go to the ER right now. And we were in shock. We get in the car. It was like 15 minutes away. And I think we barely got out of the parking lot. And you're like, I'm scared. Mm-hmm. And then she just broke down. And I started crying too, because I'm like, I'm not invincible. Like, I still feel young and great, And I'm like, I could have cancer right now. And he's like, you're spitting up blood. Like, the reality of Reed saying, I think it's blood, and the doctor saying it's blood. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I'm bleeding inside. Yeah. And so we're almost to the hospital.
It's not Gatorade, it's something.
Right.
At this point, it was confirmed it's not
it's
Gatorade.
something.
Yeah.
And we're almost to the hospital, and we're both trying to process this. And we're getting ready to turn to where the hospital road is, and I just remember vividly, saying, it's in times like these where you have to wonder, is God done with you? And I remember we're both looking straight, and Steph was like,
As if we don't look at each other.
Well, as soon as I said that, she instantly was like, the big eyes, like looking at me, like, why are you talking like this?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know the end of my story, but I just don't think this is it.
Yeah.
We've had these conversations.
I say that all the time.
Yeah.
When people are like, weren't you nervous? I'm like, I just don't think that's how my story ends. Like,
Yeah.
I think
I think
God's
that's
got something
exactly.
bigger
I think I
than that.
stole your line. I don't think that's how my story ends. And it's just a wonder what God's doing.
Yes.
I think I said, and which is crazy, because that was like, God was already preparing me for what was to come, and the fact that that was almost my first thought. Mm-hmm. When I had a rational thought, that was it. Because before that, it was like
Panic.
I didn't know what to think.
Yeah.
And then when I finally got my thoughts straight, that was the thought God gave me. So then we
it's like, how are you getting ready to show off?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
So we get checked into the waiting room of the ER, and we walk up to counter, and the girl says, are you the one from Kenya?
So they had already known we were coming.
Yeah, it was like word gets around fast on a
Yeah.
small island, right? So they take us back to the ER, to the exam rooms or whatever, and we had a lady doctor walk in at first, and a man doctor walk in later. They started taking all kinds of vials of blood. They took me back for a CT scan. They were taking my blood pressure, vitals, all that stuff, and then we started getting a little bit of information back from my vitals. And my first thought was, when are we getting out of here? And I kept asking, like, the nurses and doctors, like, how long is this going to take? You know, when we want to get to the beach. We're leaving tomorrow.
We're supposed to be heading
So this
to
is a
Kauai.
Saturday.
A different.
Island.
This is a Saturday morning, and we're getting on a plane at noon Sunday to go to another island. This is the middle of our vacation. And I'm like, we got to get out of here.
Yeah, we got places to go.
How long is this going to take? You know?
Hang on one second. I want to rewind. So when the doctor comes in, he's in this hazmat suit.
Mm-hmm.
We heard his perspective.
Right.
What goes through, like, do you hear anything outside of, like, here are the three options?
You mean
like,
in
how do
urgent
you
care, not
at urgent care,
In
yes.
urgent care. Yeah, I think I was just in a state of shock. Like, we're thinking it's absolutely nothing. And then here, now you're telling me our whole world would be turned upside down if it's, you know, one of these major things. So I think I just kind of went into shock mode.
Yeah.
Really. And then in the car, I'm like, is this really happening? Like, I'm scared now, you know, that this could be reality.
And you're hours away from, I mean, you
away
have
from
friends
everybody,
there, but
right.
you're hours away from, like, all of your support system.
Right.
We're a half a day away on a plane.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
And then
can't drive there.
it's a full day of travel.
And then when they started telling us about tuberculosis in the ER,
Which is what?
it's
like,
a highly
what is that?
infectious, nasty, contagious disease where it's like leprosy. It's like,
It spreads, I think,
spreads
easily.
super fast. And we're in a remote place that is really sensitive. Like, if you've read any information about how they handled Hawaiian Islands handled, the pandemic, like, they're pretty scared of infectious disease because there's nowhere to go.
Right.
So they're basically, of the three options that were on the table, tumor, cancer, tuberculosis, their main objective was, we want to know. We want to know tuberculosis.
Yes.
Not a know what's wrong with me.
Yep.
They wanted an NO tuberculosis.
Yep.
So I didn't feel they were as concerned about my health as they were concerned about everybody else's.
Yeah.
And that became apparent like right away.
And then
Is this
I'm
just your
thinking-
issue, or is this all of our
right.
issues?
I don't know. Yeah.
Like, that's what they wanted to know. Like,
Yeah.
oh man, we've been talking to this guy.
Yes.
Without
So
a
I'm
mask
thinking
on.
if he has TB, then our whole family, the Sills, the friends we
Like,
were with,
who
are going to all
knows,
have to be
right?
tested.
as
When
we're
are
in
we
the
gonna-
ER, we started calling and texting all of our friends that I had been around and
Okay.
letting word out, like, hey, they're concerned I'm have TB. If I do, like, I've been around you in the last couple of weeks, blah, blah, blah. Like, we started putting word out. So word started getting out Saturday morning that I was in the hospital. Felt great, but I'm getting hooked up to all these machines. I couldn't move anywhere. I was so miserable because I
Yeah.
was immobile.
I remember texting you.
It was
like,
awful.
how's it going? You're like, awful. I'm in the hospital. I'm like, again?
Again. So we're in the ER, like, literally urgent care waiting area or exam room for like 8 hours. And they started treating me like I had the plague. They didn't even offer us
They
water.
didn't ask
no
if
food.
we wanted anything to drink.
8
nothing.
hours.
They just
We were there
went
from, like,
full,
before 10.
self-preservation
Oh, yeah.
mode. It was
Yeah.
all about them and everyone else in
Yep.
the hospital.
And then when somebody would come in, they'd like stick their head in the door.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't even come into the room. And
that
then
also
anyways,
probably shows you how rare it is that someone gets TB.
well, they said it's super rare in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because
And,
I think we have a legit vaccine. Like, I think there's a shot for it that prevents us from getting
I think
I
so.
heard there.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
there?
what? I don't know. I don't think there was. And but I don't know.
Yeah. But just the
And
rarity of it.
it's
That's
very
how
rare.
they didn't know how to, like.
But all they
react.
heard was Kenya.
Yeah.
TB. So about 4:00, 5:00 in the afternoon, they admit me. We're gonna admit you, and I'm like, I can't go home. They're like, no, we're gonna admit you, and we're gonna admit you in basically an isolation room. I forget what the exact name, what they called it, but they wheel me. They wouldn't even let me walk. I'm like, I'm totally cool to walk, and they wouldn't even let me walk. They put me in a wheelchair. I'm like, this is stupid, So they wheel me all the way up to this 4th floor. We go into this room, and there's a steel door. It wasn't a normal, wooden whatever. It's a steel door with a little tiny window in it. And then you go into containment room that's about 4x4. And then there's another steel door with a bigger glass window, and there's metal mesh in the windows. And then you go through the second door, and then it's about 7 feet wide by about 9-10 feet long. And that was the whole room. And then they put me in here, and at this point, I'm like, what is going on?
It's like a
I
detox.
I can't get out of here. And the doctor tells me, comes in, and he's like, this is whatever this type of room is, because we have to have your air filtration system in this room is specific to just this room. It doesn't go anywhere else in the hospital. It's filtered, whatever. And I'm like, when am I going to get out of here? Like, we got to catch a flight in like 12 hours, And it just, the reality of my situation, I don't think set in right away. And, 6 o'clock came around, and then we start going into panic mode. We're not getting out of here. Then it started to set in. We started making, decisions. Like, we have this trip, we're supposed to go to this other.
Do we cancel snorkeling? Do we
And are you
cancel
there
ziplining?
with him?
She's
Yes,
with me.
in
Are
the
they
room.
allowing you in that room?
Well,
Yes, but I had to fully put on, gloves,
Hazmat,
mask,
yeah.
whole thing.
Suit. And then they pulled her aside and basically said, here's what you have to wear. Don't touch him. Like, we don't want you in this room, but
Basically, they let me stay for a little while, but they really didn't want me in there.
Okay.
But
At
I'm
all.
thinking I've been with them for a month. Our whole family
Yeah.
has been together, and nobody's sick.
If he got it, we got it.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was the only one
But
that
you
had
were-
an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the only one coughing, and I'm the only one spitting up the stuff. So later on, the reality set in of we're going to have to make some changes. So we started canceling stuff. We started figuring out, like, we got to rent another car because we had to turn our car in the next day. We're supposed to leave. We'd lose our hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Another thought hit me that, it's about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And then I'm like, she has to leave. I remembered when we were at dinner the night before at Mama's Fish House, sitting around, we're with another family, and the 4 of us, the couples, were sitting at one table, and then the kids are off in the corner on another table of 6. It was so great. The ambiance was so
awesome.
nice. The food was amazing. And we're just, chit-chatting. We've known them since college. So when you know somebody for 20 plus years, the conversation gets a little different, right?
Yeah.
So we start asking all these crazy questions. And Kevin, for whatever reason, decides to ask, what's your biggest fear? And that's a super deep. I don't even know if I've ever thought of that. I don't even know if I ever wanted to answer that. And then we're all thinking about it, and I answer first, and it probably was a few minutes before anybody answered. And I was like, I fear being alone. I'm a people person, and I want to be around people, and I don't want to be by myself. I think it would be super hard. That's like my biggest fear. And this hits me 1 hour.
Before I have to leave
Before
the
you-
hospital.
About to be alone.
Yep.
I can get emotional still thinking about it. I started like counting down the time. Like earlier that day, I'm like, stop wasting my time. And now I'm like, I don't want time to move. Still raw. So I knew, in an hour, and that was like 50 minutes, 40 minutes, 30 minutes, I was going to have to say goodbye. This reality, was real. She's going to have to say goodbye. And I remember the Sills texting saying we're about 40 minutes out.
Because they were going to come pick up.
Yeah.
Stuff. Okay.
Well, she had a car because we drove there, but she's out of her mind. She's scared.
Yeah.
They called and said,
I'm directionally challenged too. So let's be honest. I'm like, how am I going to get back to this
And I
hotel
think
at
you-
night?
And I think you
I'm a
even
mess
told them-
anyways. Yeah.
You told them like, hey, I can drive. And then, Ange called
said-
me and said, be honest. I said, there's no way she's going to make it back.
I would have, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
it was just relieved a little more stress, one less
Well,
thing
and you
to
could
have
be
to
with-
stress about.
He's going to be alone. You can be with people.
Right, exactly.
So they came to pick her up. We counted down, and it was like we kept going in and out of tears because you didn't want to leave. I didn't want you to leave. And then they got there. Angie came up to get Steph. I never saw Ange. And then we couldn't hug. Like, for somebody whose biggest fear is being alone, or used to be my biggest fear, that was probably the hardest moment I've ever gone through in my life. they instructed her to not touch me. They didn't want her to be there. She's in this suit. I didn't have to be in a mask. I'm
Which
laying
is
on
weird.
this-
The one who has it doesn't have to, but
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, she wouldn't hug me. I couldn't hug her. I think we touched fingers.
with my glove on.
E.T.
Yeah.
And as soon as she like turned to walk out, like I completely broke down. I think
Yeah.
you were strong to where you didn't really, because I watched you like in the containment room. She
Yeah.
had to take her stuff off, and I'm like looking through the window, and I know when you walked out,
That's when I lost it, when I saw Angie. Yeah. Then I think
she completely broke down.
Why was it that, like, you had just, 5 days prior, you had spent 5 days in Kenya where you're without her.
Right.
Like, you've gone on all these trips where you're traveling and y'all aren't together. Why
did you
was
cry?
it about this situation where it's like, hey, I'm coming back in the morning.
Right.
You're going to be here for a night.
I think maybe
Like, what
because
was
you're
it?
just so far from home,
Okay.
the unknown, they still
'Cause you
hadn't
still
told
didn't
us
know
what it was.
what
So
it
we're
was.
like,
We had no
does-
information.
Yeah. Does he have cancer? Is it TB? Like,
Yeah.
how long is he going to be stuck in this place? Like, we knew nothing.
Yep.
They did all these tests, but no one could give us an answer at that point.
And the best thing I can relate it to is, when you're a kid and you get sick, all you want is mom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you're a baby adult, man,
At least
and
traumatic situation.
in a
Right.
traumatic
You want your-
situation,
It was at
I
the
mean,
time.
and something's wrong with you, you want your best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want
Yep.
your closest, she's my best friend. She's my wife, but we're super close. And it was like ripping a part of my life out of that room. And not to mention for me, like, that was legitimately like 12 hours earlier. I'm like, or 24 hours earlier, I'm like, this is my biggest fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then here I am 24 hours later, having to say goodbye to my wife in a situation where I'm scared for my life, and I'm by myself in an legitimately isolation jail
Yeah.
inside of a
It
hospital.
felt like a jail cell
Yeah.
in there.
And I'm like,
Well, and probably not knowing what you have. Like, is this something where we can just take some medicines,
Right.
TB, I'm here, and like we're good? Or is it one of those other two options that's much
Well,
larger, and are these days few?
Right.
how
Too.
long? Well, there's
Yeah.
so many unknowns. And
How many
then we
more,
started learning about TB. The healing process of that is like 6 to 9 months. I was told that you pee
Yeah.
blood for months. And they were like, we just need to pray that it's TB. Like, that's the best thing, because of the 3 options. I'm like, it takes 9 months. I'm super contagious. I have to be isolated until
Yeah.
it goes into whatever state. Like, it was awful. And they're like, pray for that. So I'm like,
The only thing I know about tuberculosis is that it was on the Oregon Trail game that you played as kids. That's what would
That's
take
funny.
people out.
we learned a lot about it,
Yeah.
and it was legitly horrifying. Then she leaves, and it was crazy. Like, it took maybe 2 or 3 minutes that I really broke down, like the ugly cry. And I think you did too, like in the hallway, but those people around, so you probably gathered
I got
yourself
it, yeah.
a little bit faster
She's a
than
little
I did.
stronger.
Yeah.
In that
She's
regard.
clearly stronger. She's way less emotional than I am. And, it was almost like a switch went off. Like, it was crazy. I went from like broken, alone, to strong. And I can't even explain how fast that happened. And you said it kind of happened the
For
same
me
way
too.
for you.
Mhm.
It was like, okay,
Let's do it.
I got
Yep.
this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to sit here and cry all night. And I will say the funny thing is, I walked into the bathroom, there was like a funky shower. Felt like I was in college. And I was like, I ain't showering in there. I'm like, I'm only going to be here for a night. Like, I can do this. And I went and I brushed my teeth. I think I freshened up. But I'm like, I ain't showering in this place. Because in my mind, I was
like
so in
a
denial.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, I am not unhealthy.
Yep.
Like, there might be something wrong with me, but I am strong. I am healthy. But I was still hooked up to so many things. Like, I had a machine on my right, 2 machines on my left. I had these wires coming out of me. Things are beeping, and I even said, it makes you feel like you're sick. Like, I feel great, but being here, being hooked up to all this stuff, having stuff all over me, the perception is I'm in
Something has to be
jail
wrong.
Right.
Yep.
and I'm sick. Something's got to be wrong with me. And then she leaves. She goes back. Chaos started with
Chaos.
this.
Because I had to pack up the whole hotel room or condo that we were staying in because we had to check out the next day because we're supposed to be leaving.
No packing had happened
No.
because we were there all day.
It was
Right.
crazy, things everywhere. So I had to pack all his stuff up for him. We're calling them, how do you pack the camera lenses? Where do I put this? Because he has certain things he does, and then I'm like, okay, then tomorrow I've got to return the rental car. And should I rent another car? Like, what do we do? We had to.
How long are we going to be here?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had to get another hotel room because we didn't have a hotel room in Maui. We're supposed to be in Kauai. So finding a hotel room. So it was just all that kind of stress.
And I couldn't
on
help
top
at all.
of, right.
I'm completely worthless alone.
Other than just being able to be accessible by the phone, right?
Right.
So we began to cancel stuff. She goes down to the desk that night. The hotel's fully booked. Because of our status, they were able to work out something where they can give a room for 3 days.
Right.
So we had a clock that started that was going to expire in 3 days and it was one room. We had 2 families. And all they could give us
In
was
one
one
condo.
room.
Yep.
So they crammed all 9
Slumber
of them.
party.
Yep,
Yeah.
it was.
All 9 of
It
them
was.
crammed into this
Glad you're
tiny,
close and get along
Yeah.
with them.
tiny little room. I had a room all by myself, which I wasn't happy about.
Yeah.
And they were in, chaos.
It was fine, but
Yeah.
yeah.
It was chaos. And then the next day came and, crazy things started to happen. They go to return her rental car. And just before they get to the rental place, we had 2 rental cars. The Sills had figured theirs out, but she had to figure hers out. Well, they were like, I don't know, 2 minutes from the rental car place, and the brand new car that the Sills had gotten, they extended, had 3,000 miles on it. The engine light came on.
Yeah.
And the car, something happened with the car, and they were right there, next to the rental car place. He pulls in. The guy's like, "You can't drive this car." And then they had to give him a new car on the spot, but it happened right there.
Yep.
Wow.
And then she goes in and was able to I think the lady just took pity.
I think she felt bad.
She's
she
there.
gave us a discount.
Yeah.
Well, the
Yeah.
rental car that we had the week prior was it was a Turo, and it was $1,000, and that was the cheapest we could find. She goes into Hertz or something.
Yeah.
Shout out to Hertz.
Yeah.
The lady took
Big corp.
pity.
Yeah.
And we got it for
Yours-
$323 for the
awesome.
entire week.
Yeah.
Which was crazy.
Yep.
And it was almost like God was like, I got you.
He
Yep.
took care of us in the chaos.
He gave us the room for
and
3
one
days.
step at a time, too.
Right.
Right?
Right. One step at a time.
literally.
Take the next step.
Yeah.
Take the next step.
Yep.
So she figures that out. We start canceling everything in Kauai. She comes to the hospital. I don't remember what time, noon, 1. I get up that morning before she had come. While she's doing all that craziness, I'm all by myself. I couldn't really help. I think I canceled one thing. And I start reading, having my devotions. And my first devotion, I knew if there was anything that was going to help my perspective, is I needed to find joy. So I started doing a study on joy, or finishing a study that I started earlier on joy. And the devotion that morning was find joy in nature. And I'm looking out the window. And I'm like, well, that's going to be pretty challenging. So I was like, I got to do another one. So the next one was find joy in community. And I'm like, I literally thought, is this a joke? The first one is go find joy outside.
Mm-hmm.
I can't leave. The next one is go find joy with people. I'm alone. And I'm like, what? And I wasn't arguing with God, but I'm like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third devotion I had that morning was find joy in obedience. And I'm like, well, maybe I need to focus on that, because I'm all by myself. What are you trying to teach me here? We're still trying to figure out what's wrong. We're there for almost over a day at this point. We had no answers. They were taking all these things. I was able to talk them into taking one of the machines off me at night. Then the next morning, they took all the other machines off. So I was there for less than 24 hours, in the room for probably 16 hours, and they unhooked me from everything because all my vitals kept coming back great. The only thing that was slightly out of whack was my white blood cells, which let's just say the gauge is 10 is low and 20 is high, just making up numbers.
Sure.
I was a 21.
Yep.
So I was slightly high, but they're but clearly
You have
something.
a little
Something's
infection.
going
So
on.
of course, yeah.
It was something.
Yes.
Tumor or whatever
Yeah,
you want to call it. But if it
something's
was the scary things, you'd have thought it would have been
They
2,000,
really
right?
spike.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was one off,
Yep.
and which was doing a little bit for my mental capacity. And then, which was crazy that happened that day on Sunday, the next day I was in there, word was really getting out. I don't know if you had posted, but we had just, put word out because of potential for TB. So then it snowballed. And then my phone started blowing up on Sunday, and it was crazy. And what God began to do was show me community, but I didn't see it as community. I just saw it was just a distraction that, I had somebody to call and text and talk to. And I mean, my phone was crazy. Over the next day and a half, I walked over 15 miles in that little room. That's
Pacing around the bed, back and forth.
Had to renew the tile.
That's how healthy and strong I felt.
Yeah.
That I'm in this little tiny room.
He's like, I can't just lay here.
Yeah, and I got up, I started moving, and I'm texting, I'm calling. I spent, I think that on Sunday, 9 hours talking on the phone. She's talking on the phone on her phone, texting, communicating. Like, I didn't realize it on Sunday. I realized on Monday. But on Sunday, God gave me so much joy and community, but it didn't click. Mm-hmm. But I was like, man, this is nuts. And then you came, and I felt like we started we started digging in with the nurses and the doctors about what's going on.
Like why do we not know anything? You've taken how many vials of blood? He's had to do these sputum samples. Yeah, you did 2 of those, I think.
And one of the tests we learned took 2 hours to get results. And I've been here for over a day. Right. At this point, I was here for a day and a half. And I was like, you're telling me nothing.
By this point, you should be able to tell
Even over a weekend, we can get some lab results.
Nothing. We had nothing. And so later that day, I don't know what, it came up, you need to be strong. Me. You're telling me. She's the strong one in the family. If there's confrontation, if there's an issue, 9 times out of 10, she's strong. 9 times out of 10, I am not. And I'd rather just sweep stuff under the carpet. And she's like, you need to fight for answers. You need to fight for this. And I'm like, well, let's pray about it. So we prayed that God would either give me the fight or give me the peace to just sit and wait. And I was on the side of fight, even though it's not in my character. But I was definitely open to like, God, if you just want me to be here and be miserable, because I was miserable. Mm-hmm. I was cooped. You call me a caged lion.
Caged lion, yep.
If you want me to be this caged lion and just be here until they release me, give me a peace about that. Or give me this uncanny fight ability that is just not normal for me. Yeah. So she ends up leaving. It wasn't the hardest moment of my life because that was the night before. This was the second hardest moment of saying goodbye again. We still cried. It wasn't as hard, but it was just as difficult. She leaves. She gets home, back to their cramped 9-people hotel room. And then we got on the phone because Reed, our little guy, was really struggling. He cried a lot. We got on the phone. We were FaceTime a little bit, and we were talking on the phone. And I can't tell you how many times in my life I've ever fallen asleep on a phone call. But for whatever reason, I'm all by myself. Nobody was in the room.
Yeah.
I fell asleep. And I'm in a place, like normally when you're uncomfortable, when you're out of your element, you can't sleep. I slept like a champ Saturday night. And this is Sunday night, and I'm talking to my wife and my son, and in the middle of the conversation, I just fall asleep, which I still can't believe. You had to hang it up the phone.
We were like, are you there?
Yeah, and I'm passed
I'm like, well,
out.
I guess he's asleep.
And then
pumping that room full of fresh oxygen.
Yeah.
And to give you an understanding, nobody wanted to come in this room. Like she was in the room for 8 hours that day about, and like 2 nurses walked in. When they do, they're all garbed up, and they didn't want to come in because of the work that they had to get dressed in these hazmat suits, and they just didn't want to come in. And so I'm like literally by myself. And when they come in, they don't go near me. They don't want to touch me, and they've got all this stuff on. And I'm passed out on the phone, and I feel this pushing on my shoulder. And I'm like, I jumped because I'm like, in my mind, I'm in isolation. Like I can be laying here naked and nobody's going to see me, And this I felt this thing, and I wake up and I jump, and there's it was a nurse, her name was Sienna, and she's looking down at me, and she pulled down her mask. She had no hazmat suit on and no gloves on, and she's touching me, and she pulls her mask down because when I saw her mask was already down, and she goes, "Hey, I'm Sienna, and I just wanted to talk." I feel like this was one of those answers to prayer. there's times in your life where you pray hard and God doesn't answer. And then there's times where you just, good grief, what's wrong with me? Where you just say a quick prayer. Like, we prayed, I don't know, it might have been 15 minutes. But we're like, give me a peace. I mean, it was straight up. I don't know if she was saved, but she was definitely an angel. And she came in, just showing her face. I think this is why it was so hard for me. Because I was all by myself. Everybody coming and covered up. And she came in and she showed me her face. And I can't even tell you how, amazing that was. Because nobody else did. The doctors would have shields on. And they'd have those special masks on where you could barely see their eyes. Nobody, and they'd have gloves. They didn't even want to touch me. And this lady comes in with no outfit on. She had clothes on. And,
That's good.
and she pulls her mask down. She goes, I just wanted you to see me. That right there was so amazing. And then I sit up and we talk, and I look at my phone, and I'm like, Steph? And I realize it's like, where'd you go?
Right.
And I'm like, I even said to her, I was like, I think I fell asleep talking to my wife. And my phone was like just my normal screen, right? Yeah. And she's like, what's going on? So then I kind of share the whole situation. And I kind of shared about not our prayer, but, where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm frustrated. I don't have any answers. They've taken, I think at this point, 20 vials of blood. Yeah. They've probably taken 2-3 samples of sputum, urine. I mean, you name it, they've done it. And I have zero. We literally knew as much at that moment, Sunday night at 11 o'clock at night, than we knew when I was in the urgent care. Nothing other than your vitals look good. And they took me off all these machines. And we ended up having this great conversation. And at the end of the conversation, just telling her where I'm at, I didn't let out I'm gonna fight or
Yeah.
I just shared my heart because I'm always vulnerable. Clearly, I cry. And she's like, listen, I don't want to talk bad about anybody. I don't want to talk down about any doctors or this hospital. She's like, I've been working here for 2 years, been a nurse for 6. But if I'm in your situation, she pulls out this thing. It's attached to her, and it's a little square box, and it's beeping. And she goes, I'm diabetic. She goes, I've been diabetic my whole life. And she goes, when I was young, I spent a lot of time in hospitals because they didn't know what was wrong with me. And she goes, I'm no stranger not only to working here, but being a patient in a hospital. And she goes, I've been here for 2 years, and if I get sick right now, I'm going back home. And she's like, my advice to you is run, get back home, go back to your doctors. Don't do anything here. Don't want to talk bad about anybody, but go home.
Yep.
And then she ended up leaving the room, and I called you right away. And I was like, an angel just walked into my room.
She told us what to do.
And she basically said, she told me about this thing called AMA. AMA is against medical advice. And she goes, you need to start that process first thing in the morning, and which is a big no-no. So I call you right away, and I explain the whole situation. And I'm like,
we're going to do it.
I got to be the squeaky wheel. I'm going to fight. So first thing in the morning, start making all these phone calls. Nurses come in. I told her start it, so I had people calling me. And I'm like, AMA, let's go, And then all of a sudden, after I started being a squeaky wheel, I didn't even have to face confrontation. We started getting answers. And we learned that I had two tests came back, a blood test and a sputum test. Both came back negative for TB. And the blood test, it's the gold something standard. And that was negative. Straight up, you don't have it. And then my first sputum test came back negative. I'm like, sweet. Can I leave? And they're like, nope, we want 4 negative tests.
I know. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, 4. And that means, and they can only take 1 test a day. So that means you want me here another 2 days. And then I got on the phone with billing. At first we thought it was cheaper. Since they were charging me $13,000 a day to stay in this place. And I got on the phone with, the doctors wouldn't even come in now. Even though I had 2 negative tests, they would call me. Nobody would walk in this room. And I'm like, I was talking to the doctor and the nurse. I'm like, you're charging me this much money to be here. We have negative tests. I don't want to be here. I was like, can you afford $13,000 a night? If you're in my situation, knowing you feel good, I was like, I've walked 15 miles. The day before, I'd walked, I think, 9 miles in that room. And I was like, I've walked 9 miles yesterday in this room. I was like, and they kept telling me, you're presenting yourself well. You're presenting yourself well. I'm like, what do you mean by that? They're like, you're acting healthy. I'm like, I feel great.
I am.
Right. Let me out of here.
Let me out of here. So long story short, within like 4 hours, I told you I'm out of here by noon.
Yeah,
I'm
was.
leaving.
He's like, be
I'm
here at noon to
walking
get
out
me.
of here at noon. Whether they give me a go or discharge or whatever,
Yep.
I'm literally walking out this room. All the while, so many people were calling me, and I had so many people call, and you know how in times like these you'll call a friend or text a friend, hey, I'm praying for you. In this situation, I had people texting me entire prayers that would take me minutes to read. I'd have people send me an audio recording of them praying over me. I had people call, one of my buddies called me, and he takes the phone into a conference room at his office and brings in some of his staff or all of his staff, and they literally prayed around the conference room one by one.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at the end of that phone call, I shared the story about dinner. I shared the story about my biggest fear. And then God hit my heart that day in that moment. And he's like, what I'm teaching you is like, when you said you have this big fear, I want to prove to you that as a believer in Christ, even though you can be by yourself, you can never be alone. And that came out on that phone call. And I was sharing it with them. Like, it was almost like a testimony, but I was inside of the testimony. Like
Yeah.
I'm not even out of the hospital yet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God has been sitting in this room with me. He's given me such a strong community that I didn't realize was my community. Like, you know your friends, but you don't call it a community. At least I don't.
Right.
And I'm like, that devotion came so just real back to me in that moment when like, God's like, look what I've been doing. Like, I gave you strength the moment your wife left you, like to say goodbye. I gave you people. I gave you this device where you can never be alone or by yourself.
Yeah.
Like, and you have this community, even though you can't hear their prayers are what made you strong. Like, their prayers are what's got me to this point. Their prayers are why I was ready to fight. And I was fighting at that moment. Like, I am not. I mean, she could speak to this. I am a meek individual. Like, it is just not in my character to stand up to anybody.
Well,
and
you
I
had
was
so much peace that you were sleeping well to
Right.
then
super.
so that you had the energy to go and
Yep.
And like
have
my
those-
vitals, like every time they
and to
came in,
think clearly.
and to keep flushing that out, like we had those experiences. People started calling. I had another couple call me, one of my buddies, and his wife used to be a nurse, and she had all kinds of questions. She's in the background. He's like, I'm just gonna tell you right now, Julie's on the phone. You know, she wasn't here straight from you. And then they asked me all these questions, and then she's one of those people that when she prays, because my buddy's like, I want Julie to pray, for you right now. That when she like brings the fire of God,
She's got the direct line.
Yeah. And I was like to my buddy, I was like, his name's Lars. I was like, Lars, I love you, but I want her to pray.
Yeah.
No
like
offense.
no offense, but he
Yeah.
was like, bro, I'm with you.
Yeah. You feel heaven coming down. Yeah.
So she did her thing, and I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, and right in the middle of the prayer, this lady, like I can see her walking. I heard her walk into that like containment room, and then she like knocks on the door and like enters. And normally in a situation like this, when you're like tumor, cancer, TB, something's wrong with you, hole in your chest, in the hospital, somebody walks in your door, you're like, hold on, what's up? In this instance, I put them on mute and I was like, I need a minute. Someone's praying over me right now. I still can't believe I did it. That's so not me.
Sure you don't have any answers.
Yeah.
Like,
and then I shut the door and I sit back down.
I'd have been like, come on in and join.
I sit back down, and then the lady, Julie continues to pray for me, and having no idea that somebody just walked in. I don't even know who the lady was. I've never seen her before. So I'm in that state of like trying to really pay attention to the prayer, which I was, but I'm like, some lady's like staring at me right now, and she's praying over decisions for us. She's praying over sending the right doctors because we don't know what's wrong with me. And they wanted to do all these procedures. They wanted me to do all these crazy things. And I'm like, no, you guys aren't touching me. You don't even give me an answer.
Right.
And you want to do more stuff to me? I was like, if this is cancer and you go in and do some biopsy and you do something wrong, I'm going to die. That's what I'm thinking. And they wanted to bronchoscopy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you ain't touching me. You ain't doing nothing. And she's praying this very specific prayer, about the right doctors, the right information, and giving me a peace about the direction and decisions to make. And then, amen. And I'm like, hey, somebody wants to come in. Love you guys. Gotta go. I open the door, and the first thing she does, and she doesn't have a suit on. She just has a mask on. She comes in, no gloves, and she grabs my arm, and she's like, I would never want to interrupt prayer. And she's like, I'm so glad you did that. And then she sits down, she's like, listen, I'm a pulmonologist. You know, I'm on staff here. I'm a doctor, because I think I insulted her. You know?
Well, because I think when they first said that they wanted to do that procedure, they made it sound like she wasn't really a pulmonologist, but she knew how to do this procedure. And we're like, we're not letting just anybody go down and do this procedure. She's not a pulmonologist. We'll do that back at home.
And the information we had learned about it was like very vague.
Yeah, we didn't know
They weren't
much.
the best at communicating at anything.
Sure.
So she explained it to you.
Well, she comes in, sits down. She's like, listen, straight out of the gate, if you're my brother, I'm making you do this procedure. And I'm like, I ain't doing this procedure. And then we talk a little bit more, and I was like, I'm going to get it done back at home. I was scheduled for 2 weeks. And she's explaining it, or she's talking a little bit more, and she asked me tons of questions. And she goes, well, I don't think this is a tumor. She asked me a bunch more questions. She goes, I don't think this is cancer. And she goes, and I don't think you have TB. And I'm like, then what is it? And she goes, well, that's why we need this bronchoscopy. And I'm like, well, I'm getting it done in 2 weeks. She's like, we can get this done in 15 minutes. And then she goes, it only takes 10 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes. And I was like, what? Because I'm thinking this is like, you know,
An all
like a whole procedure, yeah.
And then I was like, well, what is it? And then she explains the whole situation. And I'm like, that's it? And she goes, that's it. She goes, I do tons of these a week. And I was like, really? And she's like, I went to Brown. I've been a doctor for, 30 years, all this stuff. And I was like, my comfort. It was like, God, he took me from a, H-U-double-L, not ever going to happen to like, and I literally said to her, I was like, let's do it. And she's like, all right, I'm going to send somebody in. We're going to get this procedure done in 20 minutes. And I called her, and I was like, I'm doing the procedure. And she's like, what?
We didn't discuss this.
You were like,
are you sure?
And I was so dead against it. And then we go back, fun. I won't tell you the whole story, but it was easy, quick. They do the procedure. It was crazy. Like, they're talking to me, and all of a sudden she's hit me on the shoulder, and she's like, we're done. I'm like, what? And it was like 15 minutes, 12 minutes.
Yeah, it was quick.
And then they're waiting. By this time, I actually, just after that, Dr. Lee, she was an infectious disease doctor who I'd only talked on the phone, would not come into my room, came into the room, sits down, and she's like, I got some good news to share with you. And this is just before that prayer happened. And I was like, what? And she's like, well, and they had notified the infectious disease office of Mecklenburg County and the infectious disease office for all of Hawaii and Oahu. So like bigger powers were in play in my little situation. And like they were talking about like hazmating me over to another island. It was just crazy. Like they were talking crazy stuff. And my doctor and the director of infectious disease for all of Hawaii was on the phone talking about my case. And I think it was he's the reason why I got out. And she's like, I got good news. We're going to discharge you today. And I literally started crying. I felt like I got served my release papers, from the jail.
Sent me a picture, and you're like kissing the ground outside the hospital.
He's like, I'm free.
I'm free. I told her, I was like, the first thing I'm doing is I want a picture of the ER behind me, emergency, with me kissing the ground. I'm free.
I think it's just a weird feeling, like not being able to leave if you just want to leave somewhere, like being held like a prisoner. Like that's what it. I think
and
felt
even
like.
As a friend, I had a tough time even processing for him. I'm like, why is he so like upset? Like I didn't understand everything that was going on.
Yeah.
Because we were talking, but not a ton.
You were on vacation. And
yeah,
I didn't want to bother you.
Well, and so it's like I don't understand this. He's like a wreck. I'm like, seems like it's okay. Everybody's there. He's still in Hawaii.
Right.
All this, but like as you understand more of the story,
the tumor, cancer. I don't think I told you all that.
Right, like that. But then also like you can't. There's no like access. You can't just go walk the halls.
No.
It's not like, hey, you're sick. You got something like paced through the hospital.
In the
it's
3
can't
days,
leave this little jail cell of a room.
In the 3 days that I was in the hospital, I saw a total of 5 people.
Yeah.
That walked in. I had 4 nurses and 1 doctor, and like I was alone.
And you get poor communication with that.
Oh yeah.
It would be totally different if they were like over communicating. We tested this negative, and they're like just giving you nothing. It's like the cold shoulder. And treating you like you got something crazy going on.
So I have the procedure done. I get released like within 30
Half
minutes
hour,
after.
yeah.
We walk out, we take that fun picture, and then they're like, you have to isolate. I was not allowed to leave the island.
You still had to.
We still hadn't had permission to leave.
No permission to leave.
Good grief.
And but I could go isolate with a mask and gloves and all this stuff on in my hotel room.
Which I'm sure you did.
Oh, yeah. I am a rule follower. And so we go isolate. And then the next day we're, when you're with 10 people and you're on vacation, nobody's ever together. And it was about noon the next morning, and we're sitting at the pool all together. And I get a call, and it's Dr. Lee. And she's like, well, I got really good news for you. Come to find out, they had gotten the other 2, all 4 tests had come back negative. So I did not have TB, which basically meant I either had a tumor or cancer. But the pulmonologist said, I don't think it's either of those 2. And we just ruled out TB. So what is wrong with me?
Yeah.
We had decided the night before that we were just going to go home. And then whatever reason, that moment, we're like, let's just leave it up to God. Let's see what flights are available. And if it's meant to be, it'll work out.
Yep.
So Kevin had just been checking that morning flights. And he goes, well, there's one direct flight. It's noon. He's like, there's one direct flight at 2, and there's 10 seats left.
Just happened to be 10
Just happened to
seats.
be 10 seats, and there's 10 of us.
Yeah.
So we're like, let's do it. So then everybody bolts up because we're not packed. We're thinking we're going to go home.
This is to go to the next
to
to the next
Hawaii.
island. We're like, let's leave it up to God if we're going to go home. If the flights don't work out, we're just going to go home. So let's check if there's a flight to Kauai.
Gotcha.
There's one
the flight worked out to get to the next
get to
island,
the next
not to get
island.
home.
Yeah.
for
Gotcha.
10 seats, and it's in 2 hours. And the
It's
airport
like the Home Alone scene. We're all like running around because we're all together in this little room packing
and the half hour's
things.
the airport's a half hour away.
Yep.
And we had 2 hours, and we hadn't even gotten tickets.
Yep.
Oh man, you're
So
like,
Kevin-
just put it in a bag.
Yeah.
We'll figure
did.
it out when we
We
get
did.
there.
It was chaos. So for the next 2 hours, Kevin's on the phone. We're packing up. And then we called shuttles. Like
Oh,
the
yeah, we had to
shuttles
get
come up.
yeah.
We had 7 of them with no bags get in these 2 shuttles. We hadn't even gotten tickets yet. We're still on the phone working out the
To
tickets.
purchase the
Yeah.
because
we
you're
had
trying
to call.
you're trying to change your flight.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they go, we take the other 2 Jeeps and we pack up the cars, the suitcases. I had Reed with me.
Yep.
And then they take off, and we actually hadn't got confirmation of tickets until we arrived at the hospital. Or sorry,
the
at the airport.
yeah.
Hospital's on my brain. At the airport, we get on our flight, and then we head over to Kauai for another 5 days.
Yeah.
And then that was a super chill vacation, rest of our vacation. I'm still exhausted, still had no information. And we're supposed to find out my diagnosis by Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, I get a call. They're so great at communicating at the hospital. I don't get anything on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but I was on medicine.
Yeah.
And I went from like feeling 95% healthy to feeling 100% healthy. My cough on Tuesday got really bad. I went from a mild cough to a horrible cough to no cough. And by Thursday of that following week, so this was like 4 days, 3 days out of hospital, my cough was pretty much gone.
And they had put you on a strong antibiotic.
A very strong
before he
antibiotic. They
left.
said the cough would be there for a month. It was gone in like 3 days, pretty much. And then that Sunday, I get a call from the pulmonologist saying, hey, how do you feel? Ask me all these questions. She's like, I got good news. It's just a bacterial infection. And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, the medicine we gave you that you've been on is the same medicine that we would have given you anyways. So I was already on the medicine.
Yep.
It's great.
And she goes, it's going to take probably 2 months-ish, a month to heal once you have another CT scan, but you're fine. Nothing, no big scare.
So we've gone from tumor, cancer, TB to a bacterial infection.
Which takes 5 days to heal with this medicine, and then about a month for the lesion
scarring,
to go away.
Yeah.
And in processing that whole thing, why are we doing this whole podcast? Why we're sharing the story? Two things happened that day. So that's the day we're leaving. We pack up. We are already packed up. Take our cars back. I was having a hard time checking read in. And
it wouldn't allow you to
wouldn't
do
let
it.
me to check read in on my phone to his flight. Everybody else was checked in, we had our tickets, but I wouldn't print the tickets because it would not let me check in. I'm like, I'm not checking 4 people in. So we get to the airport, we get our tickets at the counter, and they checked read in, but it wouldn't let me check them in. do our bags, everything, go through TSA. We get to the front of TSA pre-check and scan 1 ticket, 2 tickets, 3 tickets. Everything's green, green, green. Hit his ticket, it turns red. And I don't think a siren went off or something. There's like red stuff that popped up. And then there's one TSA blue shirt guy. And then another guy walks over and he's like, let's start the process.
We're like, what?
And I'm like, what's wrong? We're pre-check. And he's like, not today. And I was like, yeah, today. Like, we went through this whole thing. And he's like, you ain't getting through here today. So I started getting upset. And mind you, we just had chaos happen over the last week. Like,
right.
Nothing's been normal. Like, even when we're trying to chill. I mean, I just got diagnosis that I got a bacteria, so I feel pretty good. But I'm like, what is going on? And then they stopped this is my 13-year-old. Like, he got
flagged.
He got flagged as an important person. No, person of interest.
Yeah.
Which is basically a polite way of saying terrorist threat. So we had to go around to the non-pre-check, and then we
scan everything.
Well, no, they shut down an entire lane that we walked over. They had to read this huge disclosure, basically meaning when you're put on this list, you don't have to come through here. But in order to get through here, we're going to do an exhaustive search. So they're going through his suitcase. They made him open his phone. They started going through his apps on his phone. I've never seen that before.
I haven't either.
If he had a computer, it would have been the same thing. They go through his, you know how your bag will get flagged and they'll like scrape something?
Yep.
They were scraping everywhere.
For all the residents.
Doing all this testing in his bag. He's 13 years old.
Or like of all of us.
The mule.
And
he's the mule.
Right.
He's the one that...
So then he's freaking out.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
And you guys went through, didn't even know any of this was really happening.
Yeah.
And it took 45 minutes.
Yep.
I mean, it was crazy. And then they start doing the whole like, not body cavity search, but pretty dang close to it. I started filming him because it was quite funny. And he almost broke tear. And afterwards we get through and he's like, Dad, what happened? You know, like why is this happening? And this is really the point of why I wanted to do this podcast. It just hit me at that moment. Like, sometimes God just picks you, you know, and I'm sharing this to read. And I'm like, God just picked you. He wanted you to know he's got everything worked out, but there are times when you have to go through things that you just don't understand. So God can prove to you that he's in control. You know, God did some crazy things on that trip to us. You know, he helped me deal with my biggest fear. And you might wonder why. I have no idea. You know, but God picked me. And I was telling you, read this. Like, God picked me a couple days ago to help me deal with my biggest fear. And it's not even a fear anymore. It's silly. The only fear a Christian should have is the fear of God. We should have no other fears. You know, for Kevin to ask that question, we all should have the same answer. Mm-hmm. You legitimately can't have another fear because you're a child of God. And God picked me that moment to help me realize I only should have one fear. And if you think this is your fear, well, we're going to deal with this right now.
Yep.
And then I'm going to show you how great your community is. I'm going to show you how amazing the family of God is. And I'm going to use them and their strength and their prayer and my Holy Spirit to get you through this whole thing. And I'm going to teach you something you're never going to forget. And I'm able to share this with Reed. And I'm like, and that right now, God's just letting you know, it's a warning shot over the bow that God's got you.
And I'm with you through it
I'm
all.
with you.
Like, he never left
you. And it took you 40 minutes.
Alone.
Yeah, I was like, it took you 40 minutes, bro.
Yep.
I was in the hospital for 3 days. You know, like, this was great.
Heed the warning, the lesson now.
But it ended up being like, I had some amazing conversations and had amazing conversations about this whole crazy ordeal. You know, and I was left with, you know, like, it made us closer, like, super close. Like, we have always been best friends since we've met, and I feel like this made us closer. Mm-hmm. You know, not only as husband and wife, but as friends. You know, it brought us closer to the Sills. Like, you know, this cost a lot of money, not just for us, but for everybody. And no, they didn't leave.
Yeah.
You know, like, this was such an amazing experience. I call it like my retreat. Mm-hmm. You know, like, I had a spiritual retreat right in the middle of a vacation. Mm-hmm. It was not the vacation we planned. Mm-hmm. It was not the vacation we had hoped for. But it was the exact vacation that I needed, and I believe that everybody else needed.
Well, in your families, probably. Yeah. I mean, it galvanized that relationship with them.
Oh, yeah.
It did.
You know, and like...
I think Reed probably got the most out of it of our kids. You know, he internalized it the most. we had probably the deepest conversation, Shane a little bit. It's all the way around a life-changing story.
Will it forever for your family will be an Ebenezer that you can look back to.
Yeah.
And there was crazy things that kept happening. We didn't even go into all those details, but I've got pages of just wacko things that happened like one after the other in 2 weeks.
Yeah. We could tell story upon story.
Yeah.
But...
And you go, well, how do you know this was God? Like in the end of May, I got infected with some type of bacteria that, my doctor said, the medical research, or if I were to give you a medical diagnosis, he's like, we couldn't explain why your body reacted the way it did. I got infected with some bacteria that happened to settle in my lung at the exact place that tuberculosis settles, and my body allowed it to spread in a way that looks exactly like tuberculosis, and the way my body started to fight it is exactly how your body fights tuberculosis, but it wasn't tuberculosis. It was just an infection. And not only did this happen, but he didn't allow the color of my sputum to change until we got into a remote place that seriously takes infectious disease in a crazy manner, where if I'm going to get this diagnosis and I'm going to have this image identified there, that they're going to put me in this isolated place, knowing that my biggest fear was isolation the day before. Like, you can't ignore any of this. Yeah. Like, you don't make this up.
Yeah.
Like, this is clear that God wanted to teach me something. God wanted to teach you something and our kids something, and hopefully impact community on this, because this was amazing.
Yep.
And I think the crazy thing is, I don't like going into this, like I say, hey, something like this is gonna happen to you. How are you gonna react? I asked you, what did you take away from how this whole thing went down? And I think you gave me one of the best compliments I think I've ever gotten from you was, I'm proud of how you responded. I'm not going to get emotional. In that situation, you can get to like, this sucks.
Right.
Why?
Sure.
I want out. But from the moment, before we got to the hospital, God's doing something.
Yep.
I don't know what he's doing, but we're about to, figure it out. And then my response the whole time, I wasn't happy. I did take a shower. I took a shower on that Monday. That was the last thing I did before I got discharged. But the reality of seeing God in the midst of tribulation was probably the most special thing that I got to experience through that whole thing.
Yeah. And just seeing God's faithfulness throughout the whole process. Like, just all the little details. Yeah, we didn't know 2 days from now what we were doing, but every day he gave us what we needed.
Even the last thing that happened, we're on our last flight to get to Charlotte from Detroit, because we took a million connections. We had all kinds of chaos happening with our last flights. We had to rebook. Nothing happened smooth.
Yeah.
And we're sitting apart because our flights got changed. And we had 2 kids, and it was crazy. And I go up to the ticket counter and I'm like, can we sit together? She's like, it's a fully booked flight. And I'm like, there's no way, like, we're a family of 5 and we're sitting all over the flight. And she's like, no. So we're sitting on the flight, and our 2 kids are up in front. She was able to get Reed right next to us. And we're sitting there, and I have my head down. I'm right by the window, and I'm sitting down, just kind of like this. And Steph's like hitting my shoulder, and she's like, the lady's standing there. There's a ticket counter. We're sitting in our seats, and the doors are pretty close to shut.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, do you want to sit next to your kids? And I'm like, and I talked to her like an hour and a half earlier, because we got to the airport. We had a 4-hour layover. And I was like, I'd love to. And she's like, well, there's 2 seats up front. You can go sit. And I was like, well, I'm not leaving my third son by myself. And she goes, well, the person sitting next to the other 2 didn't make the flight, and the other 2 just canceled. So this was the front row right behind first class. And the 3 seats, there was 3 on one side and 2 on the other. The 3 seats that were right there had just not made their flight. And she walks over to us and she's like, you guys want to move up there? And I'm like, yeah. So God, at the very end, at the last thing that happened, we find out the situation. He's like, gave us a no. And then as we're sitting there faithful, like, okay, this is what God wanted. He's like, I got you. Mm-hmm. And he brought it up, we all got to sit, all 5 of us in a row on the very last flight, which we were incapable of doing for whatever reason, because our flights got changed. And he's like, I'm going to let it work out this way because it's going to be more impactful. Yep. I'm not going to let her say no, but I'm not going to let these people show up, so I'm going to give those seats to you. And she walked over the gracious of her heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she could have just said nothing.
It's nothing. And the seats could have been open.
Plane, it's fine.
Yep. She walked us over, and that was crazy. Yeah. I'm like, all right. Like, God's ending with the cherry on top. You know, like, this has just been a crazy trip. And I could tell probably 50 of those types of stories that happened during this trip. Crazy. But we need to close this podcast.
Yeah.
So,
thanks for sharing.
Yeah, this is fun. I'm so glad that you got to share. You were all nervous about it. You did awesome.
This is not my thing normally, but yeah.
So hopefully,
you're welcome.
This was something you can get out of. You know, this doesn't have anything to do with, you know, decision making or anything like that. But at the end of the day, yes, it does. We love that God did this in our life. It was a big experience that we got to learn and walk through, and hopefully it impacts you in some way. So God bless. Hope you enjoyed hearing our story.